They said the snow glowed red that winter. From the rooftops of Würzburg, smoke rose like prayers dark, twisting columns drifting into the pale sky above a city that had forgotten mercy. The year was 1629, and the river Main lay frozen solid, as though even the water refused to flow beneath the weight of what it had witnessed. In the heart of the Holy Roman Empire, what began as whispers of witchcraft became one of the bloodiest purges in European history. Hundreds of soulsmen, women, even children, were accused of consorting with the devil. But Würzburg's witch hunt was unlike any other. It didn't stop with the poor, the widowed, or the powerless. It reached upward, claiming priests, nobles, scholars, even the mayor's own son. Imagine it, a city of only 8,000 people, where nearly 1 in 10 would die by flame or blade. The story of Würzburg is not just about superstition. It's about how a society, convinced of its righteousness, can consume itself from within. It's about fear, weaponized by faith, and how easily good men can become executioners. The year was 1629, one of the coldest on record. Europe was caught in the jaws of the little ice age. Harvests failed, famine stalked the land, and pestilence followed in its wake. To the people of Würzburg, this was divine punishment. And when men could not find mercy in heaven, they began to search for devils on earth. The 30 Years' War raged across the continent. Armies looted villages, peasants fled their homes, and entire regions were reduced to ash. Würzburg, though spared from direct battle for now, was surrounded by ruin. The fear was palpable, like a fog that seeped into every alleyway. Rumors began as murmurs. A farmer's cow refused to give milk, surely a curse. A child fell sick and died, muttering nonsense, clearly possessed. A baker's bread blackened in the oven, witchcraft, without question. And in a time when reason froze along with the rivers, even the most impossible seemed plausible. At the center of it all stood Prince Bishop Philip Adolf von Arenberg, ruler of Würzburg, a man of iron faith and unyielding authority. He believed the devil was not a metaphor, but a neighbor. His city, he declared, must be cleansed. He established a witch commission, a special court empowered to identify, torture, and execute those who served Satan. Its methods were precise, its zeal unrelenting. The first suspects were commoners. A washerwoman accused of bewitching a cow, a boy who claimed to see a black man dancing in the forest, a miller's wife whose butter wouldn't churn. But torture makes confessions as easily as pain makes tears. And once one person confessed, names followed like a flood. Each witch named 5 others. Each confession birthed another. And soon, Würzburg's prisons overflowed. The bishop's men built new cells in the castle dungeons. The guards joked bitterly that the devil had more followers than the church. But the laughter didn't last long, because soon, the accusations climbed the social ladder and the laughter turned to silence. A judge's brother, a cathedral Troy boy, the mayor's son, even priests, none were safe. Arenberg believed this proved the depth of corruption, that Satan had infiltrated even the sacred. His sermons thundered with fury. The devil walks in our midst, cloaked in piety, whispering lies into righteous ears. And the people believed him. They gathered in the cathedral to pray for deliverance, while outside, the accused screamed under questioning. Some confessed that they flew through the night on goats. Others swore they danced with demons. One priest claimed he had baptized a toad in holy water and fed it human blood. All lies rung out through pain, all accepted as truth. By the time spring came, hundreds had been executed, and still, the list grew. But behind the spectacle of piety was another truth, one far more human and far more dangerous. The bishop's witch trials weren't only about faith, they were about control. Würzburg, though small, sat in a wealthy region. Vineyards and trade routes were valuable. The war had drained the church's coffers, and the prince bishop was desperate to maintain power. When someone was accused of witchcraft, their property was confiscated. Their wealth, their land, their homes all passed into the church's hands. Each trial enriched the court that judged them. Each pyre fed the bishop's treasury. It was, in the end, a machine driven by fear, powered by greed, and like all machines built on blood, it could not stop itself. By early summer, Würzburg's gallows were full. Executions took place almost daily. Bodies burned in the square as townspeople watched with trembling prayers. Chroniclers wrote that smoke hung over the city as a crown of penance. Among the condemned were entire families, fathers, mothers, children. One account tells of a 9-year-old boy accused of being a witch's messenger. He was said to have ridden a cat to meet the devil. The court found him guilty. When he was led to the stake, witnesses said he asked for an apple before he died. It is said the bishop granted it. That same week, a university professor, educated, respected, was accused of turning students into werewolves. His books were seized, his notes declared blasphemy. When he refused to confess, he was tortured until he admitted to cursing the town's weather. Even the clergy began to whisper, if learning could not save him, who could be safe? The bishop answered that question himself. No one is safe until the devil is gone. And so the flames continued. By midsummer, Würzburg had become a city under siege, not by an enemy army, but by its own fear. The smell of ash never left the air. Children grew up thinking fire was the sound of justice. Mothers whispered prayers, not to God, but to whoever might make their names disappear from the bishop's lists. In the cathedral square, the pyres burned so often that locals called it the altar of purification. Every few days, another cart rolled in, creaking beneath the weight of trembling prisoners. Their heads were shaved, their eyes hollow. Some sang hymns. Others were silent, already broken, long before the flames reached them. The executions were public, but the accusations were secret. The people never knew who would be next. Inside the Prince Bishop's castle, the witch commissioners worked tirelessly. They claimed the devil's followers numbered in the thousands. In truth, they were feeding the same fire that would one day consume them. Among them was Dr. Georg Hahn, a respected lawyer and scholar, loyal to the bishop, but quietly horrified by what he saw. He had begun to notice a pattern. Those with wealth or property were accused most often. He kept a private journal, noting each arrest and what was taken. It is as if, he wrote, we have turned the devil's work into our own trade. But even Hahn's education and service couldn't protect him from suspicion. When one of his servants was accused of witchcraft, the servant's tortured confession revealed that his master had attended the devil's feast. The accusation was enough. Dr. Hahn was arrested and thrown into the same dungeons he once visited as an observer. He was stripped, questioned, and chained. His wife and 2 daughters were seized days later. All 3 would die before him. Hahn's final words were said to be, God, forgive them, for they know not what they do. He was burned in the market square, his ashes scattered over the river. Rumors spread that the devil had cursed the bishop's city, that each innocent death only strengthened the evil one's power. Yet the trials continued. Records tell us that between 1627 and 1631, more than 900 people were executed in Würzburg alone, though some scholars estimate as many as 1,200. That's nearly 1 in 10 citizens, men of learning, merchants, monks, and nobles were all accused. In one of the most chilling accounts, 19 priests were burned for witchcraft, accused of holding black masses to summon Satan himself. Their only crime was being too outspoken against the trials. A chronicler wrote, the fire consumes not only bodies but the memory of reason. And he was right. One name that haunts the records is Abbot Johannes Junius, the mayor of Würzburg, a man of reason, widely admired for his honesty. But one day, in June 1628, a writer arrived at his door with a letter bearing the bishop's seal. Within hours, the mayor was in chains. His crime-tortured woman had named him as one of her companions at a witch's Sabbath. For 6 days, Junius was tortured, his hands crushed between wooden blocks, his flesh torn by pincers. He refused to confess. Then they brought his daughter's letter. She, too, had been arrested. They told him she would die if he did not speak. That night, he confessed to anything they wished, flying through the air, kissing the devil's feet, casting storms, even eating children. He signed it with trembling hands. But secretly, before his execution, he smuggled out a letter written in his cell. It read, I must say that I am innocent. Though I must now confess lies, may God forgive me. They will burn me tomorrow. I die as I have lived, loyal to truth, though truth has no tongue in this place. That letter survived. It remains one of the most heartbreaking documents of the witch trials. The people of Würzburg lived under constant terror. Confession was salvation, but silence was death. Friends betrayed friends to save themselves. Families turned on one another. Even children accused their parents, not out of malice, but fear. A record from August 1629 lists 27 children executed for witchcraft. Some were as young as 8. They were accused of flying to the Brocken Mountain to dance with demons. Their proof, one child's dream. The bishop's men said dreams were messages from Satan, and thus, enough to condemn. The city's chroniclers began to despair. One wrote, "Our streets are cleaner than our souls." Another whispered that the devil had already won, not by tempting sinners, but by convincing the faithful that murder was holy. Yet there was one man who dared to resist Father Cornelius Loos, a theologian who had once spoken against the witch hunts in the Netherlands. He wrote a treatise condemning the trials as heresy, arguing that confession under torture was no confession at all. When his words reached Würzburg, he was branded a heretic. The bishop's men seized every copy they could find. Loos himself vanished soon after. Some say he fled. Others whisper he was burned in secret. Either way, his voice was silenced. By late Eluarju, Würzburg was crumbling under its own madness. The vineyards lay untended. Trade had collapsed. Entire families had vanished. Even the bishop's allies in neighboring cities began to recoil. The witch fires had become a spectacle of horror. But Ehrenberg remained unmoved. He declared, "Better 100 innocents die than one witch escape." His words echoed through the cathedral halls like a curse. And then suddenly, the trials began to falter. Not because mercy returned, but because the flames had run out of fuel. There were too few left to accuse, too few left to burn. The city stood quiet for the first time in years. The silence was worse than the screams. When winter returned, the bishop fell ill. Some said it was God's punishment. Others, poetic justice. He died before the snow melted. His body laid to rest in the same cathedral whose bells had tolled for hundreds of innocents. After his death, the witch trials of Würzburg collapsed almost overnight. The new administration, horrified by the scale of destruction, ended the executions. But the damage was already done. The city's population had been cut nearly in half. Whole bloodlines were gone, property records erased, families scattered, and yet no one was ever punished for the massacre. The flames had gone out, but their smoke lingered for generations. Centuries later, scholars would uncover the old letters, the death lists, and the confessions most written in the same trembling script. The Würzburg Massacre would come to be known as one of the largest and most horrifying witch hunts in history, a place where men, women, and even children were all equal before fire. It would also serve as a warning that when fear and power unite under the banner of righteousness, even the most civilized cities can become instruments of hell. And in that sense, the devil did walk in Würzburg, not in the shadows, but in the open, wearing robes of gold. When the bells of Würzburg tolled for the bishop's death, there was no mourning. The sound that once called men to prayer now echoed like a sigh of relief. For the first time in years, the air above the city was clear. No smoke, no screams, no crackling pyres. But the silence that followed was not peace. It was the uneasy quiet of a wound that refused to close. Philip Adolf von Ehrenberg's successor, Franz von Hatzfeld, inherited a city of ghosts, half-empty streets, burned fields, an economy in ruin, and a people too frightened to speak of what had happened. The witch trials had ended, but their shadow lingered. Everyone knew someone who had vanished into the flames. Everyone had stayed silent when they might have spoken. And that guilt, unspoken, hung heavier than the smoke ever did. The new bishop, to his credit, sought to restore order. He abolished the witch commission, freed the few prisoners still awaiting trial, and ordered the destruction of the torture chambers beneath the castle. But he did not condemn what had been done. He called it a tragic necessity. That phrase, tragic necessity, became Würzburg's way of forgetting. Survivors lived in quiet terror. Children who had watched their parents die grew up afraid to pray aloud. Widows avoided each other in the market. People crossed the street to avoid speaking to families once accused. No one wanted to be reminded. The city tried to move on. Churches were rebuilt. Markets reopened. But when night fell, the wind carried whispers. They said that on cold evenings, you could still smell the burned wood in the square. That sometimes, in the flicker of candlelight, you could see faces in the cathedral windows. Faces that turned away when you looked too long. To the rest of Europe, Würzburg had become infamous, a cautionary tale whispered by travelers and chroniclers. Yet inside its walls, no one dared call it murder. They called it cleansing. Years later, a scholar from Nuremberg named Johann Linden, passing through Würzburg, described what he saw in his diary. The people walk as if burdened by memory. They do not speak of the witch fires, yet every soul burns with what was done. He noted that the city seemed divided between those who believed justice had been served and those who quietly carried shame. Even decades later, arguments erupted in taverns, some saying the devil had truly been defeated, others muttering that Würzburg had damned itself. But the truth no one dared admit was this: the witch trials had not ended because people found compassion. They had ended because there was no one left to accuse. Among the few who tried to preserve the memory of what had happened was Father Matthias Eckhart, a young priest during the trials who later became a chronicler. He kept secret notes, names, dates, and stories hidden in the binding of his prayer books. He wrote, "May God forgive us. We have burned his children in his name." Those words were never meant to be read in his lifetime. They were discovered centuries later in the archives of a monastery outside the city. Father Eckhart never spoke publicly of the trials again, but in his parish, he was known for one strange habit. Every year on the anniversary of the bishop's death, he placed a single candle in the cathedral square and prayed until dawn. He never said for whom. Würzburg eventually rebuilt itself, stone by stone, decade by decade. The vineyards returned, trade revived, but beneath the cobblestones and cellars, the bones remained a grim foundation for a city that had learned to smile over scars. By the mid-1600s, the witch trials had faded from daily conversation, but they lived on in nightmares and in the strange superstitions that followed. Mothers warned children not to wander near the old castle. Farmers refused to till the land where the gallows once stood. And yet, as time passed, another transformation began. The very place that had once been cursed, the execution field, became known as the Meadow of Mercy. People gathered there, not for trials, but for festivals. It was as if the city, desperate for redemption, had decided to bury its sins under celebration. But every so often, when the fireworks lit the sky, some said the smoke drifted in the wrong direction, toward the old castle, not away from it. In 1653, a visiting Jesuit named Andreas Balthasar preached a sermon in the cathedral, denouncing the witch hunts as the devil's deception of Christians. The congregation sat in stunned silence. Afterward, an old woman stood and wept. She told him she had lost her entire family in the trials: her husband, her son, and her sister. It was the first time in decades that someone spoke of it publicly. That moment, one small act of honesty, marked the beginning of Würzburg's slow reckoning. Letters began to surface, accounts written in secret by witnesses, scribes, even guards. Some were apologies, others were pleas for forgiveness. A few were simply names, lists of the dead, written so they would not be forgotten. And though the city would never issue an official apology, the people began to remember. Centuries later, during the Enlightenment, German historians rediscovered Würzburg's witch trials. What they found was staggering. Hundreds of confessions, property records, and death warrants signed with trembling hands. The files filled entire shelves. The documents painted a chilling picture: systematic persecution, driven by fear and greed, justified by faith. In the margins of one record, a scribe had written a single Latin word: miserere, have mercy. That word appears dozens of times throughout the archive, scribbled by unknown hands beside lists of the condemned. It's as if even those recording the trials could not bear what they were documenting. By the 19th century, Würzburg had grown into a peaceful, scholarly city once more, home to a famous university and Baroque architecture. Tourists came for its vineyards and palaces, not its ghosts. Yet, in 1892, a historian named Friedrich von Spee the Younger, a descendant of the Jesuit priest who had once condemned the witch hunts, published a work titled The Fire That Spoke. In it, he wrote, Würzburg was not possessed by witches, but by fear. And fear, once sanctified, burns hotter than any flame. His book reignited debate across Germany. Churches condemned it. Scholars praised it. But, for the first time in centuries, Würzburg's name was spoken again, not as a place of holiness, but as a warning. Even into the modern age, traces of the past remain. Excavations in the old city have uncovered charred wood, rusted chains, and fragments of rosaries near the market square. In 2009, a memorial was finally erected in Würzburg to honor the victims of the witch trials. It stands quietly near the site of the old gallows, a circle of stone engraved with 157 names, though many more are lost to time. At its center, an inscription reads, "In memory of those who were condemned to death in delusion and injustice. Their only guilt was to be accused." Each year, candles are lit there, and when the wind carries the faint scent of smoke through the square, some say it's the city breathing again, not with fear, but with remembrance. History, they say, does not die. It just changes its shape. In Würzburg, it hid in the cracks of the old cathedral, in the whispers of grandmothers, in the way people flinched when thunder rolled, as if storms still carried the devil's breath. For centuries after the fires, the city lived with an unspoken rule: do not speak of the witches. Children learned the story in half-truths, that once, long ago, evil had walked the land, and holy men had driven it out. Teachers skipped the details. Priests prayed for the souls of the purified, and the few who dared to ask questions were met with silence. But silence, like ash, settles deep, and beneath that silence, something stirred. By the 18th century, Würzburg had become a center of music and learning. The prince-bishops who followed Ehrenberg commissioned art, cathedrals, and libraries, desperate to paint over the memory of blood with beauty. The Würzburg residence, a masterpiece of Baroque architecture, rose where once the witch commissioners had kept their records. But some of those records were never destroyed. They survived in hidden drawers, behind false panels, in the archives of monasteries, too old to remember what they protected. When Enlightenment scholars began to study the witch hunts, they uncovered these forgotten pages, brittle, ink-stained relics of madness. They found signatures of children, confessions that began with the words, "I am innocent," margins filled with Latin prayers, as if the scribes themselves sought forgiveness between each sentence. One historian described the experience: "It is like reading a symphony composed of screams." Those discoveries changed how Germany remembered its past. The witch hunts, once considered divine justice, were reinterpreted as a tragedy of ignorance. Universities held debates, philosophers wrote essays, and theologians argued over the balance between faith and reason. But in Würzburg, where the ghosts were real, remembrance was slower. People still crossed themselves when walking past the old castle. And at night, the wind that swept across the main river still seemed to whisper names. In 1757, a young painter named Franz Joseph Unterkocher was commissioned to restore murals in the cathedral. While cleaning one of the old walls, he discovered faint outlines beneath layers of paint, figures with hands raised, surrounded by fire. He realized they were portraits of the condemned. Someone, centuries earlier, had painted them into the cathedral itself. Then later generations, ashamed, had covered them over. Unterkocher told the clergy what he found. They ordered him to repaint the wall. But before doing so, he sketched the images on parchment. At the bottom of his sketch, he wrote, "So they will not vanish again." That parchment still survives in the Diocesan Museum, one of the few visual records of Würzburg's witch trials. The people, meanwhile, made their own kind of peace through superstition and story. Villagers near Würzburg told tales of the red snow, a winter storm said to turn crimson where innocent blood had soaked the ground. Others spoke of the singing pyres, a legend that claimed if you stood near the old execution field at midnight, you could hear faint voices, not screaming, but singing hymns of forgiveness. These stories were not about terror anymore. They were about memory, ways for a wounded city to keep its ghosts company. But superstition is a fragile bridge to truth. And by the 19th century, the age of reason demanded facts. That's when the documents resurfaced again. In 1888, a professor at Würzburg University, Karl Gottlieb Schneider, began cataloging parish records. He found boxes of yellowed papers, labeled Causa Maleficarum, the cases of witches. Inside were hundreds of handwritten confessions, property seizures, and execution orders. Schneider spent years reading them, documenting the unimaginable names of farmers, tailors, priests, children. One entry described a woman accused for laughing during Mass. Another recorded the trial of a monk who dreamed of flying. What stunned Schneider most was the precision. Each execution was accounted for: time, place, method. Würzburg had turned murder into bureaucracy. He later wrote, "It was not chaos that killed them, it was order." When Schneider's findings were published, they shocked Europe. Newspapers compared Würzburg to the Spanish Inquisition. Some called it the darkest chapter in German history. Others dismissed it as ancient hysteria, preferring to see it as a relic of medieval ignorance. But for the citizens of Würzburg, it reopened an old wound. In 1902, the city council debated whether to erect a memorial to the victims. Some argued it was time to acknowledge the past. Others said it would tarnish Würzburg's reputation as a university town. The proposal was quietly dropped. Instead, they built a new fountain in the market square, a symbol of rebirth. No plaque mentioned that beneath its foundation lay the ashes of hundreds. It would take another 100 years before Würzburg found the courage to remember openly. The 20th century brought new horrors, wars, bombings, and dictatorships that made the witch trials seem distant. During World War II, Würzburg was nearly destroyed in a single night of Allied bombing. The firestorm that swept through the city in March 1945 was so fierce that survivors later said it looked like the sky itself had turned into a pyre. The irony was not lost on historians. Once again, fire consumed Once again, the innocent burned. After the war, as the city rebuilt for a second time, the witch trials resurfaced as a haunting parallel. Teachers began including them in local history lessons. Churches held memorial services not just for the war dead, but for those who had perished centuries earlier in the name of righteousness. It was as if Würzburg, scarred twice by its own flames, had finally begun to understand. In the late 20th century, artists and writers returned to the story. Plays, novels, and documentaries brought the forgotten victims back to life. One playwright, Anna Reger, whose ancestors had lived in the region, wrote, "We are all descendants of the accused, because to be silent is to accuse ourselves." Her play Ashes of Faith premiered in 1987 in Würzburg's rebuilt theater, standing on the same ground where the trials had once been decreed. When the final act ended, no one applauded. The audience stood in silence, as if listening for the ghosts. Then, in 2009, the memorial was unveiled. It was small, almost modest, a circle of smooth stone engraved with the names of the known victims. But the simplicity made it powerful. Flowers were placed beside it every day for months. After the unveiling, that same year, the Bishop of Würzburg released a public statement. "We remember with sorrow and humility the victims of injustice carried out in the name of faith. May our church never again mistake fear for holiness." It took 380 years for those words to be spoken. Today, Würzburg is peaceful, thriving, alive. The vineyards still stretch over the hills. The cathedral bells still ring, and the river still glitters in the sun. But the memorial remains, quiet, unassuming. Like a whisper from the past, reminding those who walk by that reason and compassion must always stand guard against fear. At night, when the square is empty and the candles flicker, the inscription gleams faintly under the streetlights. Some say the air smells faintly of smoke, others insist it's only imagination. But imagination, like memory, is a form of truth. And perhaps, in the end, that's the lesson Würzburg left behind. That evil does not need monsters. It only needs believers. That mercy delayed is not mercy at all. And that the fire, once lit, can take centuries to die. They say cities never truly forget. They only learn to remember differently. And Würzburg, though rebuilt and reborn, carried its memories like old scars beneath polished skin. For centuries, the city's story had been told by the victors, by bishops, scholars, and rulers who framed the witch hunts as misguided zeal, or worse, as righteous acts. But beneath the official history lay another chronicle, the one whispered in kitchens, the one sung in half-remembered lullabies, the one written in the bones of the earth itself. In the centuries after the fires, Würzburg became a paradox. It was both a beacon of learning and a monument to ignorance, a city that taught philosophy in its universities, while its citizens still avoided walking the path to the old gallows hill after dusk. Grand cathedrals rose above the rooftops, yet the ground beneath them was haunted by the echo of screams. And perhaps that contradiction, faith and fear intertwined, is what made Würzburg's story endure. By the 18th and 19th centuries, as rationalism spread across Europe, the witch trials became symbols of what happens when superstition rules over logic. Philosophers cited Würzburg as a warning in treatises about fanaticism. Poets used its name as metaphor, the Würzburg fire. They wrote, where the mind devoured itself. But within the city, the memory still carried shame. Families who had once benefited from the confiscated property of the condemned avoided questions about the past. They built wealth on ashes, and that knowledge was passed down like a quiet inheritance. Never spoken, but always known. A local legend said that every 7 generations, a descendant of an accuser would be born who could hear the voices of the innocent. And though most laughed at the tale, some claimed to have heard whispers on the wind when walking through the market square at night. The deeper truth, though, was that the massacre had not only destroyed lives, it had reshaped belief itself. The faith of Würzburg had been a weapon once. Now, it became a mirror. Priests began preaching humility instead of authority. The church, chastened by centuries of silence, began to speak of sins committed in ignorance. A Jesuit scholar in 1723 wrote, "When we burn others in God's name, we burn God in ourselves." That line, copied and reprinted in pamphlets, marked a turning point. The trials became not an act of devotion, but a sin of pride. Still, the fear lingered. In remote villages beyond the city walls, stories persisted of women with strange herbs and men who read the stars. Even in the age of reason, people were still accused, not in court, but in gossip. Doors slammed, families ostracized. The witch hunts had ended, but the instinct to blame had not. Würzburg's curse was not its fire. It was its habit of fear. In 1927, a historian named Clara Helmrich, one of the first women allowed to teach at the university, published a controversial thesis titled "The Witch Trials as Mirror of Faith." She argued that the real danger of Würzburg was not religion itself, but its fusion with unchecked authority. Her conclusion was chilling. When power claims to act in the name of purity, it will always find an enemy to burn. Her work was condemned by church leaders at the time, but decades later, it would be seen as prophetic. Because history, as always, was preparing to repeat itself. When the Nazi regime rose in the 1930s, Würzburg once again found itself under the shadow of fear. Propaganda spoke of purity, enemies were named, neighbors disappeared in the night. It wasn't witchcraft this time, it was ideology, but the mechanism was the same. Lists, confessions, confiscations, a bureaucracy of belief. Some local historians later called the Nazi purges Würzburg's second witch hunt. The parallels were impossible to ignore. In the archives of the city, decades apart, the handwriting looked eerily similar. Cold, careful, methodical. One scholar who studied both sets of documents wrote simply, "We never exorcised a demon, we just changed its name." After the war, Germany faced its reckoning. But for Würzburg, the reckoning had two faces, one modern, one ancient. Teachers began drawing lines between 1629 and 1939, between witch trials and political purges, between blind faith and blind obedience. The lesson was bitter but necessary. Civilization is fragile when fear is holy. Students visited the memorials. Priests preached sermons about compassion. Historians finally spoke openly about the moral collapse of the 1600s. And in those classrooms and cathedrals, the voices of the dead found their echo. In 1973, a symposium held at the University of Würzburg marked the 350th anniversary of the first major witch trials. Scholars from across Europe attended. One speech, delivered by theologian Dr. Heinrich Lorenz, brought the audience to silence. He said, "The tragedy of Würzburg is not that we burned witches. It is that we believed we were saving their souls." That line became immortalized in the city's memorial literature, engraved beneath a plaque that still hangs in the university's library. For the first time, the massacre was not seen as a shame to hide, but as a lesson to remember. By the dawn of the 21st century, Würzburg had embraced its ghosts, not as curses, but as guardians. Artists carved them into sculptures, teachers used them as lessons, and the church itself spoke their names in prayer. During the annual memorial on June 24th, candles lined the streets from the cathedral to the old execution grounds. Locals walk in silence, carrying lanterns, one for every 100 who died. When the procession reaches the memorial, a choir sings an old hymn, once banned during the trials. Dona nobis, pacem, grant us peace. As the final notes fade, the wind from the river carries the sound across the city. And for a moment, the air feels lighter, as if history itself breathes again. But remembrance is never just about the past. Every generation faces its own witch hunt, different names, different flames. The lesson of Würzburg lives not in museums, but in the choices people make when fear knocks at their door. Because the faces of evil are never strange. They are familiar. They sit in pews, wear uniforms, give speeches. They speak of safety, purity, loyalty, faith. And that is what makes them dangerous. Würzburg's true legacy, then, is not the fire. It is the realization that every human heart carries a spark that can either warm or destroy. As one modern historian wrote, the witch trials were not a chapter of history. They are a mirror, and the reflection is still ours. And so, the story of the Würzburg Massacre ends where all true histories begin, not in the ashes, but in the lessons we choose to carry forward. Because remembrance is not about guilt, it's about vigilance. And every candle lit in Würzburg Square tonight burns not for the dead, but for the living, who must never forget how easily the fire begins. The flames of Würzburg did not burn alone. Across the Holy Roman Empire, the same madness smoldered in Bamberg, Fulda, Eichstätt, and countless villages whose names history forgot. The Würzburg Massacre was not a tragedy in isolation. It was part of a storm that swept through the German lands in the early 17th century, consuming reason, mercy, and law itself. To understand Würzburg's terror, one must see the world it belonged to, a fractured empire, a battlefield of faiths, a land convinced it stood at the edge of the apocalypse. The 30 Years' War had turned the empire into a graveyard. Cities starved, soldiers plundered, and the countryside crawled with the displaced and desperate. Religion, once a comfort, became a weapon. Priests and preachers thundered from pulpits that every misfortune, every failed harvest, every pestilence, every storm was the work of Satan's agents. And when people began to die by the hundreds, the search for the devil's hand became feverish. In Bamberg, barely 40 miles from Würzburg, Prince Bishop Johann Georg II, Fuchs von Dornheim, built what he called the Hexenhaus, the witch house. It was a fortress of interrogation, its walls painted with scripture, its chambers filled with screams. The bishop's motto, carved above the entrance, read, "Let justice be done, though the world perish." Within those walls, over 600 people were executed, men and women alike. The Bamberg trials became infamous even in their own time. Scholars, nobles, even foreign diplomats begged the bishop to stop. But fear is a fire that consumes its own warnings. The more people died, the more proof their judges saw of Satan's power. News of Bamberg's zeal spread like wildfire, inspiring neighboring bishops, among them Philip Adolf von Ehrenberg and Würzburg, to launch their own purges. What began as imitation became competition. Reports from the era read like madness, translated into bureaucracy. Villagers accused of spoiling crops. Nuns accused of flying through keyholes. School children accused of whispering to invisible spirits. Every confession was treated as truth, every denial as proof of guilt. And yet, as the trials expanded, they revealed a disturbing truth. That witch hunts were not only crimes of faith, but also politics. The territories of Würzburg and Bamberg sat on valuable land, confiscated estates, filled church treasuries, while those who opposed the bishop's authority conveniently disappeared. Fear, it turned out, was profitable. But even as the pious multiplied, so too did the whispers of dissent. Across Europe, voices began to question how a God of mercy could sanction such horror. One of the first was Friedrich Spee von Langenfeld, a Jesuit priest, and ironically, a confessor for the condemned witches of Würzburg and Bamberg. Spee had seen the trials firsthand. He had listened to countless confessions extracted under torture, and he knew beyond doubt that every single one was false. In 1631, risking his life, he published a book anonymously, Cautu Criminalis, a warning concerning criminal trials. In it, he wrote, "The more I examine the accused, the more certain I am that there are no witches at all." He denounced the entire system as a machine of injustice, a self-feeding circle of accusation and agony. Torture, he argued, did not reveal truth. It created it. His book spread secretly across Europe, smuggled by monks and merchants, read in candlelight by those who feared the church's wrath. And though the Inquisition condemned it, Cautu Criminalis became the first spark of reason in an age of hysteria. Spee's courage planted a seed that would take generations to grow. By the late 17th century, the tide began to turn. Judges grew hesitant. Jurists started questioning the validity of spectral evidence. In Würzburg itself, later, bishops quietly forbade the use of torture in witchcraft cases. The fever had begun to break, but the empire's conscience was slow to heal. Many who had participated in the trials lived out their days in denial. Priests who had blessed the executions, scribes who had inked death warrants, guards who had tied ropes around shaking wrists. Some drank themselves into oblivion. Others joined monasteries, hoping that silence could bury memory. But memory, as Würzburg had learned, does not die. By the dawn of the Enlightenment, the witch hunts were remembered with embarrassment, relics of a darker time. Yet even as Europe congratulated itself on its reason, philosophers used the trials as proof of something far more unsettling: the human capacity for self-deception. Voltaire wrote, "When men believe absurdities, they commit atrocities." And Jean-Jacques Rousseau warned, "Superstition is not the mother of devotion, but of cruelty." Würzburg's tragedy had become philosophy as evidence, a case study in the danger of blind conviction. The city's name appeared in essays, sermons, and even plays across Europe. For intellectuals, it was a symbol of how civilization could fall, not through barbarism, but through faith without thought. Yet, for all the essays and enlightenment, the shadow of the witch hunts lingered in subtler ways. The idea of the enemy within, of invisible corruption hiding among ordinary people, never truly disappeared. It resurfaced in politics, in ideology, in every crusade where righteousness justified cruelty. The ghosts of Würzburg had simply changed their masks. A historian in the 1800s summarized it with chilling simplicity: "We burned those we feared. We fear those we do not understand. We have not changed, only our firewood. But there is another legacy, quieter, nobler, born from the ashes." The survivors and their descendants became unlikely stewards of empathy. The city that once executed reason became a place that defended it. Würzburg University, which once hosted inquisitors, later produced theologians and scientists who championed tolerance, education, and reform. It is said that every year, the philosophy faculty opens its first lecture with the same words: "We study the past, not to hate it, but to prevent its return." Students walk past the memorial each day, perhaps unaware that beneath their feet lie the bones of those whose deaths bought their freedom to think. And maybe that is what true progress looks like, not forgetting the fire, but learning to live above its embers. Even today, when you visit Würzburg, the contrast is surreal. You stand on cobblestones older than most nations, in a city reborn from ashes twice, once from superstition, once from war. The air smells of wine and river breeze, but somewhere beneath it, the ghosts still hum. Every church bell carries an echo. Every candle in the cathedral burns as both prayer and apology. And if you listen closely enough, you can almost hear the words that history took centuries to learn to say. Forgive us, we were afraid. The story of Würzburg does not end with its monuments or its books. It lives in the air, in the way the cathedral bells echo across the river, in the way evening mist rises from the vineyards like smoke that refuses to disperse. Every stone here remembers. Even the walls, if you press your hand against them, seem to hum with a heartbeat centuries old. And perhaps that is the truth of history, that what we bury never stays buried. In the centuries after the flames died, time moved quietly across Würzburg eschars. New generations were born who had never seen the pyres, who knew the witch hunts only as stories distant, unbelievable, almost mythical. But even myths have weight. They bend the soul of a city. A local saying endured through the ages. Fear is the oldest faith. No one remembered who said it first. Perhaps it was muttered by a survivor, or written by a scribe who once watched the smoke rise from the square. But it lingered, and in it lay the essence of what Würzburg had become. A place that learned too late that the cost of purity was humanity itself. By the late 1700s, artists began to rediscover the forgotten tragedies of their homeland. Poets wrote of innocence burned beneath banners of light. Painters depicted the devil not as a horned monster, but as a man in robes, clutching scripture. One of them, Johann Keller, a minor painter from Franconia, visited Würzburg in 1791. He stayed only a week, but what he saw changed his art forever. In his letters he wrote, "I walked the market square at dawn. The fog rose like breath from the earth. And in that pale light, I saw shapes, not ghosts, but shadows of memory. Every stone beneath my feet seemed alive with guilt." When he returned home, he painted his masterpiece, The Sermon of Ashes. It showed a priest preaching to an empty congregation, his words turning to cinders as they left his mouth. The painting was banned by church authorities, then rediscovered 2 centuries later. Today it hangs in the Würzburg Museum, one of the city's quiet acts of repentance. The 19th century brought new winds of thought, revolution, reform, reason. But for all its progress, Europe remained haunted by its own capacity for cruelty. The laissez honnête of Würzburg echoed in unexpected places, in the Parisian revolutions, in the industrial cities where workers were branded agitators, in every courtroom where truth bent under the weight of fear. A German philosopher visiting Würzburg in 1848 wrote in his diary, "We have replaced witches with dissidents, devils with heretics of reason. The method changes, not the madness." His words would prove prophetic. In 1875, the city commissioned a historian, Wilhelm Moser, to compile an official record of the witch trials. His research filled 20 volumes. He cataloged every name, every confession, every execution order that survived. But when his work was presented to the city council, they sealed it. Too grim, they said, too divisive, too close to home. The manuscript was stored in the municipal archives, where it gathered dust for more than 100 years. When it was finally published in 1981, historians called it The Anatomy of Fear. Its final line read simply, "A city that forgets its victims becomes its own executioner." And so Würzburg remembered, slowly, awkwardly, painfully. In the 20th century, while Europe tore itself apart again, the witch hunts became a parable retold in sermons and classrooms. Teachers spoke of justice. Artists whispered of silence. But the survivors, the true survivors, were the stories themselves. A letter found in 1947 in the ruins of a bombed church bore an inscription, "To those who died unnamed." "May we speak your names until the end of time." It was unsigned, but the handwriting matched that of a school teacher who had been killed in the bombing. Even in destruction, remembrance persisted. Würzburg's churches were rebuilt after the war, stone upon stone, prayer upon prayer. But some things they did not rebuild. The old gallows field was never touched again. Grass grew over it. Wildflowers took root where once the pyres stood. And in spring, when the wind blows gently across the meadow, the petals tremble like the memory of flames. Each year, children visit the site as part of their school lessons. They listen as guides tell them the story of the trials, the bishop, the confessions. And sometimes, when the guide pauses, a child will ask, why did they believe it? No adult ever answers easily, because the real answer is not about witches or demons. It's about fear, that oldest, most human of devils. By the 21st century, Würzburg had transformed itself into a city of light, festivals, universities, vineyards, yet it never escaped the shadow it cast so long ago. Every June 24th, on the night of the memorial vigil, the bells of the cathedral ring 13 times, one for each 100 who perished. Then the city falls silent. Candles line the main river. The reflections flicker like hundreds of tiny pyres drifting downstream. Some say the river carries those lights to the Rhine, and from there to the sea, as if returning the souls of the innocent to the world they were denied. Modern historians describe Würzburg as a city that taught Europe how to grieve, because remembrance there is not grand or loud. It is intimate, woven into the rhythm of daily life. At the university, philosophy students study ethics beside the very hall where confessions were once forced. In cafes, writers debate faith and reason beneath frescoes painted by men who lived through the trials. And in the cathedral, where once the condemned were denied absolution, prayers now begin with a single phrase: for those we wronged and for those who wronged them. It is not forgiveness they seek, it is understanding. Yet, even now, the story refuses to end. Every few decades, another scholar rediscovers a forgotten letter, a new name, a missing record. Each discovery adds one more voice to the chorus of remembrance. One such letter, found in 2015 behind a false wall in an abbey near Würzburg, was signed by a woman named Anna Hertlein, accused in 1629 of consorting with the devil. She had been imprisoned, tortured, and vanished from the records. Her letter reads, "I forgive them. I forgive them all. For if I carry hate into death, then they have one." It is only a few lines long, written in shaky ink. But when the letter was displayed at the museum, visitors wept before it, because in those words lay the final truth Würzburg had been chasing for centuries, that mercy is not a weakness. It is the last victory the innocent can claim. The story of the Würzburg Massacre is not just about fire or faith or fear. It is about the human heart, how icily it trembles, how fiercely it believes, and how painfully it learns. Every generation thinks it would have done better, that it would have been braver, wiser, kinder. But Würzburg's ghosts remind us otherwise. They whisper, "We were you, and you are us." And in that whisper lies the true legacy of the witch hunts, a warning written not in books, but in the silence between bells and the smoke that still clings to memory, and in the quiet prayer that history never has to repeat itself. Time, they say, heals all wounds. But in Würzburg, time did something different. It didn't heal, it listened. Decade after decade, the city learned to live with its ghosts, not by silencing them, but by allowing them to speak. And in the second half of the 20th century, those voices finally found an audience willing to listen. In the years after World War II, Germany faced a reckoning deeper than any in its history. The nation had to confront not only what it had done, but why it had obeyed. For Würzburg, this question struck like lightning. It wasn't just about the Holocaust, or the bombings, or the ruins. It was about the older, darker question. Why had obedience always come so easily here? Historians drew a direct line from the witch trials to the Nazi regime to moments, centuries apart, bound by the same logic of purity and fear. Both were built on the same belief that evil could be purged if only the corrupted were removed. The tools had changed, the language, the uniforms, the rituals, but the heartbeat of hysteria was identical. And so, when post-war Germany began to re-educate itself, Würzburg's story became part of the national conscience. Teachers no longer spoke of witches. They spoke of mechanisms, how ordinary people could become executioners when fear turned to certainty. In 1957, a historian named Helmut Krauss unearthed a cache of trial records that had survived both the 30 Years' War and World War II. The documents had been hidden inside a hollow church wall, wrapped in parchment and sealed with wax. Among them were transcripts of interrogations, signed in the trembling handwriting of the accused. Some pages were smudged with what looked like tears. When Krauss presented his findings at a conference in Frankfurt, he said quietly, "These are not stories. These are fingerprints." The room fell silent. For the first time, the witch trials were no longer myth or cautionary tale. They were human again. In the decades that followed, Würzburg's academics turned the massacre into a case study for everything from psychology to law. Professors asked students to analyze how language, words like purity, truth, faith, had been weaponized to justify cruelty. One famous lecture in 1968, delivered by Professor Anneliese BHM, began with just one sentence written on the blackboard: "We burned our neighbors." Then she turned to her students and said, "Now tell me why." For 2 hours, no one spoke. That silence became part of the lesson. By the 1970s, the witch trials were no longer treated as theological aberrations, but as windows into the human mind under pressure. Psychologists compared them to mass delusions, sociologists to propaganda movements, legal scholars to the dangers of coerced confessions. And while the rest of the world looked to Nuremberg as the symbol of justice after atrocity, Würzburg became the symbol of understanding of how easily justice can collapse before it even begins. In 1984, the city erected its first public memorial to the victims of the witch hunts. A bronze circle embedded into the cobblestone of the marketplace, where hundreds had once been paraded before execution. The inscription read, "In the name of faith, they were slain. In the name of memory, they are remembered." Visitors often missed it at first glance. It wasn't large or grand, but that was the point. It was meant to be walked over, felt beneath the feet of the living. And sometimes, when the rain fell, water would pool in the grooves of the engraving, as if the earth itself was still weeping. As the years passed, the trials became a part of Germany's broader reckoning with truth, not as shame to hide, but as a mirror to hold. Documentaries were made. Plays were written. School children recited the names of the executed in annual remembrance ceremonies. And through it all, Würzburg evolved, not just as a city of history, but as a living conscience. By the turn of the 21st century, Würzburg had begun using technology to resurrect the forgotten. Historians launched a digital archive, the Voices of the Würzburg Trials, compiling every surviving record, letter, and confession into a public database. For the first time, descendants could trace their ancestry and discover whether their forebears had been victims or accusers. The project shocked many. Families who had proudly carried noble names discovered their ancestors' signatures on torture orders. Others learned their family line ended at the stake. One student who found such a record wrote in the project's guestbook, "I do not know if I am descended from executioners or executed, but I know I will never be silent." Those words were later engraved on a plaque beside the digital archive's entrance. In Arlingling, Würzburg hosted an international symposium on the psychology of belief and persecution. Scholars from over 20 nations gathered to discuss a single theme: the banality of fire. The title was borrowed from Hannah Arendt's famous phrase about the banality of evil, but in Würzburg, it meant something deeper. The symposium concluded that the witch hunts were not the work of monsters, but of systems, bureaucratic, efficient, terrifyingly ordinary. One keynote speaker, Dr. Matthias Lorenz, said, "It was not hate that built the place, it was obedience." Those words became the unofficial motto of Würzburg's remembrance movement. Even now, the city's annual memorial is unlike any other. There are no speeches, no fireworks, no banners. Just candles, music, and silence. The local choir still sings Dona Nobis Passing, and when the last note fades, the bishop, the symbolic heir of the man who once condemned hundreds, kneels before the memorial stone. He does not speak. He only lays a single white lily upon the bronze circle. The act lasts less than a minute, but in that gesture, centuries of guilt and grace meet in the same breath. Modern Würzburg is a city of paradoxes, alive with students, wine festivals, art, and laughter, yet still carrying the solemn dignity of a place that remembers too much. Its past has become its conscience, its suffering, its education. Historians sometimes call it the city that learned how to live with its ghosts. Because the ghosts, in truth, were never banished. They were embraced. And in that embrace, Würzburg found something that eluded so many before it. Not redemption, but reconciliation. The witch hunts that once silenced voices have now created a culture obsessed with preserving them. Every story recovered is a victory. Every forgotten name, when spoken aloud, is a resurrection. And so every year, when night falls over the city and the bells toll, 13 times the people of Würzburg stand together in silence, in light, in remembrance, and whisper to the wind the same vow that has guided them for generations: never again, in God's name or any other.